I started working with the agency in the first cycle as a volunteer research mentor. So before the first panel, when the agents were going through the process of researching and kind of fleshing out their ideas, I started working with the project and linked up with one of the groups at that point, Get Fit Fast, and so volunteered with them for a few months, and then and that was also as part of my as one of my placements for my master's training in applied theatre, which I've been doing over the year whilst I was working with the agency. And then I was hired as a producer working with the agency for the second cycle. And I was interested in the fact that, unlike a lot of other arts institutions, they have an outreach programme that isn't just about making work that can be reproduced in the theatre or getting audiences into the theatre. It's a kind of bit more than that. They are, from my view, I saw that their outreach programme more about actually kind of plugging into the communities that are, that the Arts Centre is sitting in, as opposed to just kind of building up audiences. And yeah, so that's kind of why I initially got in touch with BAC, and then I grew up in Brixton, so I know that area pretty well. Prior to starting my masters, I was working in a school in Westminster, and we had a lot of our students came from Wandsworth and Southwark and Lambeth and the kind of areas sort of around there. And obviously, from living nearby to there, I kind of had a sense of the area. And I think one of the things that's funny, particularly about Battersea and about Clapham, is that it does feel you've got very rich and very poor living side by side. And I think a lot of, I think Battersea is particularly is kind of thought of as a very affluent area, and the big estates are sort of can sometimes get a bit forgotten about, and there isn't really that much kind of mix and much crossover. The Winstanley estate, which is where a lot of the kids were coming from, is in the process of being regenerated, bits of it taken apart, and that whole kind of community is really shifting. So I thought that was an interesting group to be working with.
Cool.
I was disappointed that I wasn't able to be part of Cycle 1, because I think actually that's the bit that is really exciting, when all the monsters and the avatars and when it's a really kind of creative, think outside the box, throw everything up in the air and see what's going to happen kind of stage. Supporting young people to realise their ideas in their own space, and to kind of really see that actually they can really do something and make a difference in their community. It's not all kind of about winning X Factor or going on Big Brother or being a footballer or kind of getting out and getting rich and kind of leaving where you came from. It's actually about what can you do in the here and now within your space, within your community, that can make a difference. I wondered I haven't been to see the agency in operation in Brazil, and I met Faustini and some of the agents when they came to the South Bank Centre, but from speaking to other people who've been in Brazil, and just from my kind of observations of the young people that I met at the South Bank, I wondered if there's something about the context in which the agency is happening in Brazil potentially makes the need for the project, or the potential for the outcome of the agency, more palpable for the agents. There's a kind of sense that that actually being part of the agency can really make a difference for the young, in Brazil, you know, for the young people in Brazil, but also for the communities in which they're living in, because there is a much higher level of deprivation, because I think, you know, perception of communities in some of the favelas in Brazil, I think there is potentially a greater kind of negative stereotype or negative perception of those communities. So I wondered if actually being part of the agency feels like it really has some kind of great potential impact for those young people in a way that perhaps in Wandsworth that isn't quite so immediate for those young people. But I also just think, like, you know, through the process, and not just for Sydney Naturals, I think for all of them, just like talking to businesses in the area, talking to, you know, different kind of community partners, talking to people who came into BAC at some of the events that we ran and getting their kind of feedback, there was a lot of celebration about what these young people were doing, and people were really impressed that, like, there were young people from the area that were doing these things and had these kind of great ideas about, you know, going out there and getting stuck in and wanting to make a difference. So I think that, you know, there is that is real evidence of changing attitudes, I suppose. Almost felt a bit like none of them had quite sort of got their heads round what was actually going to happen at that first panel. That they were all just kind of in it for the process, and they were mates and they were having a good time, and it was something to do, and it was interesting and it was fun. Someone being like, I want to hear your ideas, talk to me about them, they're great, this could happen. And there was really like that was a really kind of a really great glue to bring the group together. And it was always like it was a bit of a shock to everybody involved when some people didn't go through. It's like, oh right, actually this is what happens, like we're not all part of this anymore. So I think actually even those that got through were obviously really excited and you know, energized, but there was a kind of a shift in the project that I think having just fewer numbers and perhaps those relationships that they'd started building, which then kind of weren't part of the project anymore, just changed the kind of energy and the way the group worked. Obviously, some of the guys who didn't get through actually came back and joined. So we, two Sydney's Naturals that I worked with in the second cycle, we had two members from the first cycle that hadn't got through with their initial ideas who came back and joined Sydney's Naturals. And also some of the, a later point, actually some of the other guys kind of came back and got involved with the project in a different way. The agency, in many ways, is kind of, it's grooming, not grooming, but like we are developing young people to be kind of agents in a capitalist economy, you know, to kind of create businesses that are going to make money or that could make money, have the potential to make money, as well as changing the attitudes, or be sustainable is probably a better way of putting it rather than making money, but be sustainable in a capitalist economy, as well as changing attitudes of people in their community. And, you know, the reality of being in business is that it is very much about kind of success and failure. You either get it or you don't, you get the funding or you don't, you go through or you don't. And there's something about, like, you know, maybe it's useful to kind of be educating young people that that is the reality of the world they're going into. But there is also something very harsh about that. And I think I struggled at times to kind of reconcile that for myself. My role with Sydney was really about helping her break down the kind of nitty-gritty bits of turning this great idea into a like feasible business, because I think for Sydney, actually realising all the sort of legality and the kind of intricateness of putting together a budget with all your different ingredients and all your health and safety stuff and your trading licence and all those kind kind of boring bits, if you like. How to kind of make it sustainable, how to give it longevity, who are the people around her, how to kind of just like help her really think outside the box a bit, really, about who are her networks, how can she set things up now to mean that Sydney's Naturals has legs later on. For Sydney, she wants to go to university, and helping her kind of think that whole process through about, how could she, so we're not just thinking of Sydney's Naturals as this great fun thing that we can play with for a few months. Actually, how could it be a sustainable business for her, and to make links that, so that she could keep it going while she's at uni, or have friends who are looking after it in London while she's out of London studying, or whatever, those kind of things. And then, I think the big thing was kind of budget management, time management, working on things like delegating, working with a team of her peers and giving them responsibilities, and having responsibility, like the kind of confidence herself to be able to delegate tasks. And I think also, particularly for Sydney, having this kind of aesthetic, because the product is, that her idea has got such a kind of aesthetic quality to it, it's the look, the smell, the feel. So helping her kind of put all those things together and develop kind of branding and all that kind of stuff, I think artistically that was a sort of a big part of the project. I think also for me, prior to my life in applied theatre, I spent a long time working in education and working with young people who are at risk of exclusion. So I think I also felt that was not necessarily that Sydney is at risk of exclusion, but I think I have a lot of kind of mentoring skills and kind of tutoring skills that I could bring together with my kind of arts background as well. So those are the kind of two things that I think, as a practitioner, I was bringing to the project. I think that theatres as institutions can quite often feel like they are out of bounds to people who are of different class groups. And I think theatre in lots of ways feels like it's very out of bounds of the poor, partly because it's just really bloody expensive most of the time. And I think that theatres have, obviously now theatres more and more are developing outreach projects and have a responsibility to be engaging their communities and diversifying audiences and bringing in audiences that may not necessarily be accessing theatre on a regular basis. I think that there is a lot of imparting this great, all this wonderful stuff that drama can do to all these people that can't afford it, and actually where's the dialogue, where's the exchange? The more diverse voices and experiences and skills and art forms you have in a theatre, in terms of a practice, but also in the theatre in terms of institutions, the better. It makes for interesting, rich and inspiring work. The poor or marginalised groups, or whatever terminology we're using, have space to have a say in how their voices are contributing to the work that's happening in theatres, and that they are not being represented by another, or that their involvement with theatre isn't just through kind of handouts, that they are, that I feel like I'm saying they as if it's all makes me feel a bit uncomfortable, but that their theatres need to be having a much richer dialogue with marginalised groups. There needs to be a process of exchange. I definitely feel that over that process, and I'm not one for kind of thinking about projects should change people, but the young people who were part of that process went through all kinds of evolutions with their idea, but also with themselves in terms of their confidence, in terms of their relationships with each other, and their kind of thinking about their relationships with their community, that I think were really tangible. And in that sense, I think the project had great outcomes for the young people and for the community, and for the community in Battersea. I would like to see another cycle, to see the whole cycle through, cycle 1 and 2, and I think for me, that would, because I feel like in cycle 1 is where a lot of the kind of really creative, artistic stuff happens, and I miss that bit. Not to say that there wasn't more kind of there was lots of kind of creative space throughout, but that the bit at the beginning, I think, is where a lot of that happens. So I would really like to kind of see that whole process through.